You've rounded second base and are on your way to sliding into third. In Unit 5, you'll be learning about identifying individuals who may qualify for special education services and the assessment and evaluation process that is used to make this determination. Assessment is the key to special education. It is assessment that detects a student's disability and assessment that determines appropriate programming. Identification of students who may qualify for and benefit from special education services typically begins with response to intervention, or RTI. RTI is a multi-tier framework that starts with high-quality instruction for all students and provides supports with growing intensity for those students who are determined to need more assistance according to ongoing progress monitoring and academic and behavioral screening tools. For those students who have participated in the intensive instructional opportunities provided in general education without success, special education might be the next step. IDEA now allows school districts to determine eligibility for special education services based on progress in the RTI model. However, schools may also identify students who may benefit from services via the more traditional model. A parent or teacher may make a special education referral, which is a formal request made to a multidisciplinary team to evaluate a student for the presence of a disability. This team will determine if the student requires further assessment for a special education evaluation. The National Association of Special Education Teachers has a great series of videos on special education assessment. Take a look at this resource. The videos are a great source of information. If you're looking for a parent-friendly resource related to special education assessment, you might also check out Wright's Law book, All About Tests and Assessments. It's a really easy read and describes not only the assessment process, but also how to understand assessment for different deficit areas. A student's assessment and evaluation is the foundation upon which a student's special education program is built. The results of the assessment go into a student's individualized education program, or IEP, within the present levels of academic achievement and functional performance, or PLAF. These results influence planning for individualized instruction, IEP goals, determining the services to be provided, and monitoring student progress. Without an evaluation with sufficient information provided regarding a student's level of academic performance, a district can be determined to not be providing FAPE, like in Kirby versus Cable County Board of Education. This is why it is paramount to include informal tests, curriculum-based assessments, and direct observations. These elements of a special education evaluation are key to really determining strengths and weaknesses. The IEP is really the center of IDEA. The IEP makes FAPE available to all students receiving special education services, as all aspects of the student's program are directed through the IEP and monitored throughout the IEP process. The IEP contains the goals, the educational placement, a description of special education and related services, and the evaluation and measurement criteria for the student's educational program. However, the IEP process can be a struggle for teachers. This is why I've included a pretty teacher-friendly article on avoiding procedural errors and IEP development by Yell, Katsianis, Ennis, and Lazinski. Teachers have identified a lack of training in developing IEPs and feel the development of IEPs is a very time-consuming process. Goals and objectives can be difficult to write and may not always be linked to assessment data. Finally, many parents feel they are not allowed to make meaningful contributions to the IEP process. Early in my career, I encountered a parent who felt her concerns were not being heard. The first meeting we had, she showed up with an advocate and an attorney. I was terrified. However, our team listened to her concerns and honored many of her requests. Some of what she was asking for wasn't quite what was best for her child, but we were able to explain why and offer alternatives rather than simply telling her no. For example, she was pushing for a specific placement option before the IEP was even written and discussed. The IEP determines placement, not the other way around. Once you determine what the child needs, then you can determine where those services can best be provided and for how much time. I worked with this parent for several years, and establishing a healthy relationship was a great benefit for her child, my student. I've included several videos, websites, and a learning module related to IEP development and implementation. I really like the sample IEP meeting and the videos from Autism Speaks about developing great IEPs. Moreover, take a look at the flowchart in Chapter 10 in your book. It's on page 222. It outlines the IEP development process nicely. I would print it, laminate it, and keep it with my other IEP resources. I'd also print Table 10.1 on page 225. It is a great reference for goal writing, which is a really important aspect of IEP development. If you're looking for a book on IEP writing, Wright's Law has another good book. We use it in our undergraduate legal issues course, so I don't require it at the graduate level. It is called All About IEPs. Again, it's an easy read and a great resource to keep on hand. Unit 6 covers Least Restrictive Environment, or LRE. LRE, inclusion, and mainstreaming are frequently used synonymously. However, they are not. Inclusion and mainstreaming are the idea that all students with disabilities spend the majority of their time in the general education setting. LRE refers to educating students to the maximum extent possible with their peers without disabilities. It's a full continuum of settings, though, that ranges from the general education setting to the special education classroom to an alternative or special school setting to the most restrictive, an institutional setting. LRE is about what benefits the student, not about where he's placed. When making LRE determinations, there are 4 tests that circuit courts have developed: the Ronker Portability Test, the Daniel 2-part test, the Rachel H. 4-factor test, and the DeVries-Hartman 3-factor test. Of these 4 tests, the Daniel 2-part test has been the most persuasive. In this test, the court asks whether education in the general education classroom with the use of supplementary aids and services could be satisfactorily achieved. Has the school taken steps to accommodate a student with disabilities in the general education classroom? The court must also decide if the student will benefit from the general education classroom setting and if the inclusion of the student in this setting will negatively affect the education of classroom peers. Typically, developing peers do factor into FAPE. If the school has not attempted to include the student in the general education setting to the maximum extent possible, the school fails the first part of this test. If the school passes, though, the court moves on to Part 2. If a student is placed in a more restrictive setting, is the student integrated to the maximum extent appropriate? Considering the continuum of placements, the school must provide the student with as much exposure to students without disabilities as possible. The court suggests that students who are educated primarily in segregated settings should be placed in integrated settings outside the special education classroom when feasible, such as lunch, non-academic classes, recess, etc. Your book provides a great step-by-step model for determining LRE on page 257. I actually wish I had this when I was a teacher. It really would have helped to guide placement decisions in a more succinct way. In your multimedia resources, I included a video on inclusion from the perspective of teachers, as well as a short story on a classroom in an alternative educational placement. I really like giving you guys information from the viewpoint of people in the field and/or parents whenever possible. But I also provide a lecture on LRE that Dr. Yell, the author of your text, gave during the 2015 Focus on Inclusion conference. Dr. Yell is one of the leaders in the field in special education law, especially as it relates to LRE. Please watch this video. I know it's a long one, but I kept your readings light so that you'd have more time to watch this conference presentation. As you navigate this unit, please email me if you have any questions at all. I'm here for you.